I cared for a dying billionaire, then his will left everything to his lost niece. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought I would find myself standing in the marble hallway of a mansion so vast it felt more like a museum than a home. My name is Alec Rose, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, I became the caretaker of a man who had everything money could buy but very little of what truly mattered. The first time I walked through those towering doors, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with old wood polish, and I could hear the echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the high ceilings. He was dying, they told me, and I was to make sure his final days were comfortable. That was all I knew, and that was enough to make my stomach twist with a mix of curiosity and fear. I had been a nurse for years, but nothing in my experience prepared me for what it meant to care for someone whose wealth made them untouchable and their loneliness unbearable. He was in his study the first time I met him. He was seated in a leather chair that looked like it had cost more than my apartment, and his eyes were sharp, almost piercing, even though they were clouded with sickness. He had a hand resting on a cane, and every so often, it trembled like the flicker of a candle. His breathing was uneven, shallow, but he had this presence, this aura, that made you feel like every word, every look mattered. He didn't speak much at first, only watching me as I arranged his pillows and adjusted his blankets. There was a silence that pressed on me, heavy and expectant, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I didn't know then that I would soon discover secrets that could ruin lives, secrets that had been hidden for decades behind these cold, grand walls. Days turned into a rhythm I wasn't used to. I'd wake up before dawn, make my way through the endless corridors, and check his vitals, prepare his meals, and administer medications that smelled bitter and chemical. He hardly spoke, and when he did, it was usually about things from his past. Fleeting moments of a life that had been extraordinary and yet painfully isolated. I listened more than I spoke, thinking that maybe the quiet was the only thing he had left that was truly his. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, he handed me a photograph. It was old, edges frayed, and in it was a woman, her face partially shadowed, holding a small child. "She's my lost niece," he said, voiced raspy, almost a whisper. "Everything goes to her." I stared at the photo, my heart pounding. I didn't know the woman, didn't know the child, and yet the weight of his words pressed on me like a storm ready to break. Why had no one else been told? Why was this hidden, even from the people who handled his affairs? Questions spiraled in my mind, and I felt a tension in the air, sharp and suffocating, like the calm before a hurricane. From that moment, every day carried a strange mix of fear and fascination. I began noticing small things that didn't add up: the way certain staff avoided certain rooms, the way letters arrived with no return addresses, the whispered conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered. There was a plan, I realized, one that had been unfolding without my knowledge, and suddenly, I was at the center of it, the unwitting witness to a story more tangled and dangerous than I could have imagined. Each night, I'd sit by the window of my small room in the East Wing, staring at the sprawling gardens and the darkened city beyond, wondering if what I was seeing was real, or if I was slowly being drawn into a world of secrets, meant to stay buried forever. I felt like a character in a book I couldn't put down, except the stakes were real, and the consequences were mine to bear. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to me personally, written in a hand I didn't recognize. It said simply, "The truth will be revealed soon. Watch closely." My hands shook as I held it, and the air seemed colder, the silence louder. Something was coming, something that would change everything I thought I knew about him, about the family, about myself. And I realized then that caring for this dying billionaire wasn't just a job. It was the start of a journey I hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. A journey into betrayal, hidden identities, and a truth that could destroy lives. I didn't yet know the role I would play in it, but I felt the weight of it pressing down, relentless and inescapable. Nights were the hardest. I would check his room multiple times, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, watching his chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Sometimes he would mutter fragments of memories, names, places, regrets that no one else had heard, and always, in the corner of his study, that photograph stared back at me, a silent accusation, and a promise all at once. Who was this lost niece? Why had she been kept secret for so long? And most importantly, what would happen when she appeared, stepping into a world she had never known? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Sleep came in small fragments, dreams tangled with reality, my mind running through every possible scenario. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing a fall was coming but not yet seeing the bottom. By the end of the first week, the tension had grown unbearable. Staff whispered in hushed tones, doors creaked where they shouldn't, and every interaction seemed loaded with hidden meaning. I was learning, piece by piece, that this house, these people, and even the man I cared for, were all part of a larger, twisted story, one where loyalty, greed, and deception collided. And me, I was right in the middle, caught between the past and the future, between silence and revelation. I couldn't look away, even if I wanted to. I had to see it through, had to understand the truth, had to survive what was coming. Because this was more than a story about a dying billionaire. It was about family, betrayal, and a secret that could shatter lives. And I had been chosen by circumstance, by fate, by some cruel twist to witness it all. And so, I stayed. I cared, I observed, and I waited. Each day brought a new revelation, a new tension, a new heartbeat that reminded me of the fragile balance between life and the secrets that controlled it. I didn't know if I was brave or foolish, but I knew one thing for certain: what was coming next would change everything, and I couldn't turn away. Not now, not ever. The following morning, I woke to the quiet hum of the mansion, sunlight filtering through heavy drapes that painted the walls in muted gold. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a comforting scent I had begun associating with the strange routine of my days here. But there was an edge to it, a tension that gnawed at my stomach. The letter from yesterday still burned in my mind, its cryptic warning echoing over and over. The truth will be revealed soon. Watch closely. I couldn't help but feel that every movement, every glance I made in this house carried weight, as if unseen eyes were studying me, measuring my reactions. And in some ways, they were right. I was part of a story far bigger than I could have imagined. A story where one wrong move might unravel everything. By mid-morning, I found myself in the library, a massive room lined wall to wall with books I would never have time to read. The man I cared for sat in his chair, looking frail yet still commanding attention. His eyes met mine with a sharpness that belied his weakened state. "You've seen the photograph," he said quietly, as if he'd read my thoughts. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible sigh, one that seemed to carry decades of regret and secrets. "She is coming," he murmured, and in that single sentence, the air in the room thickened. Who was she really, and why had she been hidden for so long? As the day wore on, my curiosity became unbearable. I found myself exploring corners of the mansion I hadn't noticed before: an old trunk in the attic filled with letters, a desk drawer with faded documents, and photographs tucked behind books that seemed deliberately concealed. Every artifact told a fragment of a story, a puzzle I had to piece together, and each piece revealed more than I was ready for. There were letters between the billionaire and someone identified only by initials, vague hints of disputes, of estrangement, of loss. The weight of their content pressed on me, like shadows of the past reaching across time to shape the present. I realized that uncovering these secrets wasn't just about curiosity, it was survival, understanding the world I had stepped into before it consumed me completely. Late that evening, a new figure arrived: a lawyer, a man in a dark suit with a briefcase that looked heavy with documents. He was polite but firm, asking questions about the billionaire's health and the daily routines I followed. I felt an unspoken tension as he placed a small envelope on the desk in front of him, one that immediately caught my attention. He said nothing about it, leaving as abruptly as he came, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The envelope, and the rising dread that I could feel crawling up my spine. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were papers, legal documents outlining the billionaire's will, along with the explicit mention of the lost niece receiving everything. But what startled me the most was the fine print. The instructions, the conditions, the sense of orchestration behind the seemingly simple act of inheritance. It wasn't just money yet, it was a plan, one that I had unknowingly become part of. I spent that night reading every word over and over, trying to make sense of what I had learned. The mansion was silent except for the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards. My mind raced through every possibility, every consequence of revealing or ignoring what I had found. Could the niece even be trusted? Did she know about her inheritance? And more importantly, why had the billionaire trusted me with this knowledge, with this responsibility, without any warning? I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, a heaviness I couldn't shake. The photograph, the letters, the documents, they all pointed to a story of betrayal, of lost connections, and of a secret meticulously hidden. And somehow, in this vast mansion, I was the only one who could see it unfolding. The next morning brought with it a strange sense of anticipation. I found myself walking the same corridors, but each step felt heavier, more deliberate. The staff moved around me, polite smiles, masking curiosity, and maybe even suspicion. I noticed subtle changes in their behavior, whispered words, halted as I approached, averted eyes, tiny gestures that seemed insignificant but felt loaded with meaning. The mansion, once only imposing and mysterious, now seemed alive with secrets, as if the walls themselves were watching, listening, waiting. And I understood that the story was no longer just about the billionaire's final days. It was about uncovering the truth before it was buried forever, about being present in the moments that mattered, about being the witness to a revelation that could shake everything I thought I knew. By the end of the second week, the tension had grown unbearable. I began piecing together fragments from conversations, documents, and the subtle hints left by the billionaire himself. Each revelation was like a spark in a dry forest, igniting a chain reaction of emotions: shock, fear, curiosity, and an undeniable sense of responsibility. I realized that the lost niece, whoever she was, represented more than inheritance. She was a key to unlocking decades of secrets, disputes, and perhaps even betrayals that had remained hidden for too long. I felt both dread and determination in equal measure, knowing that my role in this unfolding drama was more important than I had ever imagined. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't step away. I had to see it through, even if it meant facing truths that might shatter the world I thought I understood. And then, just as I thought I could anticipate what would come next, I received a call from someone claiming to know the niece's whereabouts. The voice on the other end was careful, cautious, almost afraid, warning me that things were moving faster than expected, that I had to prepare, that everything would change soon. My heart raced, my mind spun, and I realized that the moment I had been dreading and anticipating was finally approaching. I was no longer merely a caretaker. I was a part of a story that involved hidden identities, untold fortunes, and a truth that someone had fought to conceal for years. And deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same after this. The mansion, the billionaire, the lost niece, and even I had been drawn into a current too powerful to resist, a narrative that would push each of us to our limits, testing loyalty, courage, and the very definition of family. I sat in my room that night, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, mind racing through all I had learned. The air seemed to hum with possibility, with danger, with revelation. I felt the weight of what was coming, and the responsibility I had accepted without even realizing it. Tomorrow, the journey would take a new turn. The past, hidden behind walls, letters, and photographs, would collide with the present, forcing decisions, confrontations, and truths that could not be ignored. And I, Alec Rose, would be there to witness it all, to navigate the storms, to see the secrets revealed, and perhaps to survive the consequences. The following morning, I awoke to an eerie quiet that seemed heavier than usual, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors, but the warmth did nothing to soothe the knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. My hands shook slightly as I recalled the call from yesterday, the warning that everything was about to change. I had felt important before, but now, the weight of the truth pressed down with a force that almost made me crumble. This was no longer just about care or observation. This was about secrets that had been buried for decades, secrets that someone had fought desperately to keep hidden, and now, I was caught in the middle. I moved cautiously through the halls, each creak of the floorboards amplifying my sense of unease. The staff seemed different today, whispering behind closed doors, glances darting in my direction, their expressions tight, tense. Even the billionaire, normally composed and cryptic, seemed agitated, his eyes darting to every corner of the room, every sound, as if expecting an intruder, a revelation, or perhaps betrayal. My mind raced, replaying every conversation, every glance, every subtle clue I had uncovered. The photograph of the lost niece burned in my memory, and I kept returning to one question. Who was she really, and why had she been kept hidden for so long? By mid-morning, I found myself in the study, rifling through yet more documents the billionaire had left scattered across his desk. Letters, contracts, and notes, some yellowed with age, others freshly inked, each adding a fragment to the puzzle. The deeper I delved, the more tangled the story became. There were hints of disputes, legal battles, and estrangements, names crossed out, initials replaced with cryptic codes. I could feel the tension building inside me, a mixture of curiosity and dread. The mansion no longer felt like a home, it felt like a labyrinth of secrets, each door leading to another truth, another revelation, another danger. Around noon, the lawyer returned, this time accompanied by a young woman I assumed must be connected to the lost niece. My heart thudded painfully as I watched them enter the room, their expressions carefully neutral, yet charged with an unspoken urgency. The lawyer handed me a folder without a word, eyes flicking toward the billionaire who nodded ever so slightly. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a photograph that confirmed what I had suspected. The lost niece was real, and she was closer than I had imagined. But the folder also contained letters she had written years ago, letters filled with longing, confusion, and a desperation I could feel across the paper. I could almost hear her voice, whispering through the ink, pleading to be understood, to be found, to be acknowledged. The hours passed like a blur. I barely noticed the changing light as the day edged toward evening. Each discovery brought more questions than answers. Each answer seemed to open a new door I hadn't been prepared to face. There was a strange thrill in the fear, a twisted exhilaration in being part of a story so enormous and emotionally charged. I realized that the lost niece's arrival was not just a matter of inheritance, it was a convergence of past mistakes, hidden truths, and the consequences of choices made decades ago. And I, Alec Rose, had been chosen, or perhaps cursed, to witness it unfold firsthand. By late afternoon, the first storm clouds gathered outside, the sky darkening as though mirroring the tension inside the mansion. I stood by the large bay window, staring out at the gardens, my mind racing with every possibility. What would happen when she arrived? Would the billionaire recognize her immediately, or would there be hesitation, disbelief? How much of her story had been kept from her, and how much had been manipulated to fit someone else's plan? My pulse quickened, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The moment of truth was approaching, and I was powerless to stop it. Finally, as dusk began to settle, the doorbell rang. My stomach dropped, and every muscle in my body tensed. The staff froze, exchanging nervous glances. The billionaire remained seated, his eyes fixed on the entrance, a calm mask hiding the storm beneath. I opened the door, and there she was, a young woman, nervous but determined, clutching a small bag to her chest. She looked around, eyes wide, taking in the grandeur and the quiet unease of the mansion. For a moment, I felt the full weight of her presence, the gravity of her story colliding with our reality. Every emotion I had felt in the past week's anticipation, fear, all culminated in that single moment, leaving me breathless. The introductions were careful, measured, polite on the surface, but the tension was palpable, threading through every glance, every gesture, every word unsaid. I could feel the history between her and the billionaire, the unspoken knowledge of what had been lost, what had been hidden, and what was about to be revealed. Each second stretched into an eternity, and I found myself caught between the past and the future, a silent witness to a story unfolding faster than I could comprehend. And then, in that charged stillness, the first cracks began to show: the letters, the photographs, the emotions that could no longer be contained. The mansion seemed to vibrate with the force of revelations waiting to explode. I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. The lost niece had arrived. The billionaire's secrets were no longer safe, and the mansion that had felt like a sanctuary now felt like a stage for truths too powerful to ignore. My hands shook, my heart pounded, and I realized that I had been preparing for this moment all along, even without knowing it. The story had shifted, the stakes had risen, and the next chapter would demand courage, honesty, and perhaps even sacrifice. And I, Alec Rose, would be there for every second, every revelation, every emotional upheaval, witnessing the unraveling of a life, carefully orchestrated and hidden for decades. The night settled over the mansion like a thick, suffocating blanket, but inside, the tension was electric. I could feel it in every corner, every shadow, every hush of movement. The lost niece, her name was Clara, sat in the grand living room, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her bag, her eyes darting to the billionaire, as if expecting him to vanish at any moment. And in a way, I think we both knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. The walls that had kept decades of secrets were trembling, ready to crumble under the weight of truth. I felt my pulse hammering in my chest as I took a tentative step closer, feeling like a spectator to a storm that had been decades in the making. The billionaire, normally composed and inscrutable, rose slowly from his chair. His movements were deliberate, cautious, as though he feared that one wrong step could shatter everything. He held a letter in his hand, the same letter that had changed everything, that had named Clara as the sole heir to a fortune no one had thought she would inherit. His eyes, sharp and calculating, softened for just a moment, and I glimpsed something I hadn't seen before, hint of vulnerability, of regret, of longing for a connection long denied. Clara's gaze met his, wide with disbelief, and a fragile hope that flickered in the dim light. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening, as if holding its breath for what was about to unfold. The lawyer, standing near the doorway, cleared his throat and handed over a thick folder of documents, contracts, and wills. Every eye in the room followed the billionaire as he took a deep breath and began to speak. His words were calm, measured, but each sentence carried the weight of years of secrecy and withheld truth. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the documents, her mind racing to process the magnitude of what she was about to inherit. I watched her expression shift from disbelief to recognition, her lips parting in silent awe. The billionaire's eyes never left her, and in that moment, I could feel the unspoken apology, the acknowledgement of mistakes made long ago, the silent plea for understanding. Suddenly, a voice cracked the fragile calm. Clara's, trembling but defiant. She asked questions that pierced the room about why she had been kept away, about the choices that had shaped her absence, about the life she had been denied. Each answer the billionaire gave was a careful navigation between truth and protection, revealing fragments of the past while withholding what might crush her completely. The emotional tension mounted, each sentence hanging in the air like a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. I felt my own breath catch as I realized how high the stakes were, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually, and morally. This was a reckoning, not a ceremony. As the minutes stretched, the room seemed charged with unspoken truths. Clara's eyes glistened with tears, her jaw set with determination. She was a young woman shaped by absence, longing, and betrayal, but her strength radiated like a quiet fire. I could sense the billionaire's own internal struggle, a mixture of pride, regret, and the realization that his carefully orchestrated world was unraveling before his eyes. Every revelation sent ripples of shock and awe through the room, and I felt myself drawn into the tide of raw, unfiltered emotion. The mansion's silence was punctuated only by whispered questions, the rustle of paper, and the unsteady breaths of two people reconnecting after decades of separation. And then, just when I thought the intensity could not climb any higher, the billionaire hesitated, his hand hovering over a sealed envelope. It was the final piece, the one that contained the most personal, most intimate details of Clara's inheritance, secrets about her family, about the choices made for her, about the life she could have had. He looked at her, his eyes heavy with years of decisions he could not undo, and finally, with a trembling hand, he placed the envelope in front of her. Clara stared at it, fear and hope warring across her face. Knowing that the moment of truth was here, I felt my chest tighten as the gravity of the situation pressed down on everyone in the room. She opened it slowly, each page revealing more of the truth than I thought possible. The billionaire watched, silent, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his internal turmoil like an electric charge. Clara's reactions were immediate shock, tears, disbelief, then a resolve that transformed her posture, her gaze, her very presence. The mansion seemed to vibrate with the force of the revelation, a culmination of decades of secrecy and withheld lives. And in that suspended moment, I realized that this was the turning point, not just for Clara, not just for the billionaire, but for everyone caught in the web of past choices. By the time the last page was turned, the room was silent except for soft, uneven breaths. Clara's eyes met the billionaire's, and I saw something shift, a fragile trust forming, a tentative understanding that neither could fully articulate. I felt the weight of what had happened settle over me, the realization that we had all witnessed something extraordinary, a reckoning years in the making, a convergence of truth, emotion, and consequence. And in that quiet aftermath, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next chapter, the resolution, would demand courage, forgiveness, and a reckoning with what it truly means to inherit not just wealth, but a legacy of choices, mistakes, and hidden truths. The morning sunlight crept through the tall windows, softening the heavy shadows from the night before. The mansion, once tense with secrets and unspoken regrets, now felt quieter, almost peaceful, but the air still hummed with the weight of revelation. Clara sat at the grand dining table. The documents spread before her, each page a testament to the life she had been denied, and the fortune that was finally, undeniably, hers. I watched her, heart pounding, as she touched each paper lightly, as if afraid that the world might shatter if she pressed too hard. There was awe in her eyes, yes, but also a lingering pain. The residue of years lost, love absent, and questions unanswered. She was no longer just the lost niece in a name on a will. She was a living testament to resilience, to survival, to the quiet power of hope. The billionaire remained seated across from her, older now, frail in ways that money had never shielded him from. Yet there was a softness, a vulnerability that had not been there before, as if the act of revealing the truth had lifted a burden he had carried for decades. I could see him measuring every expression on Clara's face, perhaps fearing anger, perhaps hoping for forgiveness, but the unspoken connection between them was undeniable. He had controlled everything in life with precision and power, but now, he had to confront something far more human: the consequences of choices, the impact of absence, and the fragile, complicated beauty of reconciliation. Clara looked up from the papers, her voice quiet but steady. She spoke not just of gratitude for what she had received, but of the loss, the injustice, and the pain that had shaped her. Each word landed like a soft but piercing echo in the room. I felt my own chest tighten as I realized the depth of her journey from abandonment to recognition, from confusion to understanding, from disbelief to acceptance. Her strength radiated, a force that neither wealth nor secrecy could diminish, and I felt privileged to witness the birth of a bond that had been denied for far too long. The billionaire reached across the table, hesitating, then gently placing a hand over hers. For the first time, it was not a gesture of control, but of connection. There were no grand proclamations, no dramatics, just a quiet acknowledgement of mistakes, a recognition of the past, and the possibility of a future redefined. And in that small, unassuming moment, I understood the true weight of inheritance. It was not just the money, the property, or the material legacy, but the chance to rebuild trust, to repair what was broken, and to confront the consequences of choices that spanned generations. As the hours passed, the conversation flowed, some awkward, some tender, all human. Clara's presence seemed to breathe new life into the house, transforming it from a place of secrets to a space of potential, of reconciliation, of understanding. I watched her laugh softly at an old story, her eyes lighting up with a mixture of relief and empowerment. And I realized that the billionaire, too, was softened by the experience. He was no longer the untouchable figure of wealth and control. He was a man facing the weight of truth, humbled by its power and the resilience of the young woman before him. By the time I left the mansion, the sunlight was high, pouring warmth into every corner. Clara walked beside me, not as a figure defined by absence or inheritance, but as a young woman embracing her future with courage and clarity. She paused at the gate, looking back at the house, and I saw in her eyes a blend of acceptance, resolve, and hope. The billionaire remained on the porch, a quiet observer of the life he had helped restore, not just with wealth, but with honesty, presence, and the recognition of love long withheld. As I walked away, I couldn't help but reflect on the larger meaning of what had unfolded. This was more than a story of inheritance or lost fortunes. It was a story of human connection, of the consequences of choices, of the strength it takes to confront the past. It was a story about resilience, about the unyielding human spirit, and about the capacity for forgiveness and understanding even after decades of separation. I knew that the memory of this night, of the revelations and the reconciliations, would linger not just for Clara and the billionaire, but for anyone who witnessed, in whatever way they could, the raw, unfiltered reality of life's twists and turns. And as I left the estate behind, a question echoed in my mind, one I hope lingers with anyone listening. How often do we allow secrets, pride, or fear to shape lives instead of truth and connection? How many moments of love and reconciliation have we denied because of hesitation, misunderstanding, or silence? Clara's story had a fortunate ending, but I couldn't help but wonder about all the others who never get the chance to reclaim what was lost, to confront the past, to build a future unshackled by secrecy. The story ended here, yes, but its echoes would carry on, a reminder of the power of truth, the cost of absence, and the unbreakable strength of the human heart.